the weekly video version of the podcast, The Business of Tech. This week, what happens when the hackers are from the government? Chromebooks' big growth? Is tech's optimism unfounded? How big is the MSP market? Is encryption just private thoughts? Google and Amazon go back to work? And broadband infrastructure investments. All this and more. Hit that like and subscribe button, and let's dive right in. Google's security groups are well known and well respected. They've pushed back against governments such as North Korea, China, and Russia. And recently, they stopped an expert hacking group using 11 vulnerabilities. Turns out that was also a Western government set of operatives doing counter-terrorism. The zero-day vulnerabilities found over 9 months used infected websites to deliver malware. MIT Technology Review has the full story for more. While we're on the breach front, the Biden administration is planning an executive order to require many software vendors to notify their federal government customers when the companies have a breach, per Reuters. The order also includes rules such as a software bill of materials and requires multi-factor authentication and encryption of data inside federal agencies. This requirement would override NDAs. Now, why do we care? Here's where ethics and tech collide. Is counterterrorism something to be outside public disclosure, or is this a private industry entirely acting correctly? If it's under democratic oversight within a lawfully elected government, is it different? The Biden administration has called for some established norms and practices, and we in industry should be enthusiastically supporting that. This tension between supporting government activities in hacking, but also having to be independent global organizations, needs rules of the road. My bias is that transparency will win. To get there, we have to agree and disarm together, and that's where government can help. Today also appears to be Security Day, so let's hit 3 more. In another supply chain style attack, the official PHP Git repository was hacked on Sunday, and the codebase was tampered with. The malicious code commits happened under the guise of 2 well-known PHP developers, planting a backdoor for remote code execution. The changes were rather obvious and reverted right away. As a response, the maintainers are migrating the official source code to GitHub, and 2-factor authentication is required. CompuCom, a wholly owned subsidiary MSP of Office Depot and Office Max, is expecting their ransomware attack to cost over $20 million. The company does expect that a share of the expenses will be covered by cyber insurance. Finally, the administrators of the Ziggy ransomware, who've recently shut down, are giving the money back. They also publish all the decryption keys. Of note, even in giving back the Bitcoin, the hackers still made a profit due to the price increases of Bitcoin. Bleeping Computer reports that the admin lived, quote, in a third world country, and their motivations were financial, and their recent actions are driven by fear of law enforcement. Now, why do we care? It's all about the motivations. There's 3 to talk about. First, supply chain attacks are a trend. SolarWinds wasn't the first, nor will be the last, and here's another example. I'd be thinking a lot about that in my own organization of any size. Second, it's not the hack of CompuCom that interests me, it's the insurance payout. As those get bigger, we're going to see that pressure from insurance agencies and companies to step up controls to limit payouts. This is no small payout. Finally, the hacker motivation. Hackers, desperate to make some money, find a way to leverage technology to do it. In this case, they don't even have to operate long, can take advantage of Bitcoin to make money, and give it back. They do it short term to avoid law enforcement. There's a lot to unpack there. Understanding our opposition is key to defending, but you can see here how it's not likely to slow down or stop. In the news you can use category, the Small Business Administration has increased the amount allowed in the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. The limits go from 6 months of injury with a max of $150,000 to 24 months with a max of $500,000. This is in addition to the extension of deferment periods until 2022, previously announced on March 12th. Now, why do we care? That's all news you can use. Leverage the programs if you need to, and share the information with your customers. On the data privacy beat, there's a lot of discussion around COVID-19 vaccination passports. New York is rolling out the first, called Excelsior Pass. Residents can use it to prove vaccination or a recent negative test result, and it's entirely voluntary. At the federal level, the Biden administration is looking to pull disparate efforts together into a large, coherent one within the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, why do we care? I'm covering office reopenings later. I care a lot about this effort, both on the impact to business short term and the technology implications long term. We still don't know the length of time vaccinations are good for. Will they require annual boosters, for example, or be like the annual flu shot? Thus, there are all the business implications of managing immunization and all of the related privacy concerns with managing this data. The implementations are likely to move faster than the legal frameworks required long term. That gap is the area of interest. How will business fill it? And what blowback will we get because of lack of foresight? As the market changed, so did the Chromebook growth. Quoting CIO Dive, Chromebook shipments rose 80% year over year in 2020 and totaled nearly 30 million units, according to Gartner statistics. The firm mainly attributes the surge of demand from the North American education market. Chromebook shipments grew by nearly 200% just in the fourth quarter of 2020, reaching 11.7 million units. Now, why do we care? The big market space for Chromebooks is education, but the piece also highlights that call centers are also a big one. But hidden is this pair of quotes. For all except the younger organizations that maybe don't have much legacy technology, Chrome tends to be a difficult proposition. That's why another space where Chromebook is set to expand its reach is the small to mid-sized business space. Startups especially tend to be cloud native and rely on web-based apps. And so here's why we care. If you were starting businesses now, what tech would you use, free and clear of legacy? And answer me this. Are businesses overcompensating on their legacy investment? It's not really an investment. It's what got you where you are today. New companies will be very viable here, but small companies are too. It might just be better to just throw old stuff away. There's a bigger space here than is acknowledged, and this is the one with growth. Two bills in Washington state are moving through the legislature that allow local governments to operate retail broadband networks. Each has passed one half of the state government to move on to the other. They both give small cities, county governments, public utilities, and port districts authority over service directly. This moves beyond current law, which is to sell wholesale to private telecom companies. Now, why do we care? Public entities are entering this market. I rather love it. More competition. I'm pulling from different areas not to cover every single law, but to watch the trend. Broadband as a utility is becoming more and more of a trend. I continue to believe there's knowledge and need to explore the changes in office dynamics. So here's some updates. As previously reported, Microsoft has reopened their Redmond headquarters. Uber is open at 20% capacity. Salesforce is very close to reopening their offices. SAP is opening soon, and Facebook says 10% capacity on May 10th. San Francisco in general can open at 25% capacity. That said, not everything will be back in person. Apple announced that WWDC 21 will be all virtual again this year. Now, why do we care? The big companies are going to lead the way again like they did in the shutdown, so we're watching for some guidance. The lessons in particular on hybrid work are top priority. Note how office reopenings are different from events. That's the reason I pulled the WWDC news here. The beginning of the next phase, more than the end of something, is the way I'm viewing it. It's time for a market data mashup. Starting with TechIsle with their 2021 priorities list. In the S&B, the top business issue is increasing business growth. Top IT priority is the cloud, and top IT challenge is maintaining current infrastructure. Over in the mid-market, it's increasing profitability for business, cloud on the priority front, and managing data growth for the biggest IT challenge. Collaboration is a higher priority for smaller companies, although it's simply competing with hybrid workplace, and in both markets, alternating either the second or third places. Kaseya also has their 2021 MSP benchmark, where customer acquisition tops the challenges list. Customers, however, are ranking remote workers as the top problem, with security right behind it. Altaro Software looked at the shift in platforms. 87% of MSPs polled saw more Office 365 business last year, and a 55% increase in implementation business. Things aren't smooth sailing for all businesses, however. Half of all women-owned businesses and nearly 6 in 10 small businesses owned by people of color, at 59%, are highly concerned about keeping their firms solvent through the end of the second quarter, a new survey from Alignable shows. 45% of all small businesses are highly concerned. 41% of these companies have a month or less of cash reserves left, 49% couldn't pay March rent in full, and 74% of owners are struggling to receive PPP funds. Women and people of color are reporting more instances of harassment as well, such as hostility, exclusion, or requests for dates or sex in this new era of remote work, according to a new survey from Project Include, a group headed by Silicon Valley's Ellen Pao. And as for that security problem, Canalys is reporting that more data was compromised in the last 12 months than in the past 15 years combined. Edelman's annual Trust Barometer survey showed that favorable views of the tech sector have dropped 6 points overall. It's still far better than other sectors, but falling. And in the US, it dropped 9 points to an all-time low of 57, right into the middle with healthcare, retail, and manufacturing, but better than social media. They're at 46. Now, why do we care? Let me tell it in story form. Looking at data from the tech industry, there's optimism and opportunity in every data point. When asking customers how they feel, they're nervous, worried, having security issues, and they don't trust the technology sector. So much for the trusted advisor. The industry as a whole is taking a beating, and the market condition and sentiment has changed. Building the same amount of trust is harder and more costly than it's been before. That's just a fact. That's not to say these industry data points are useless. Just put them in the larger context. Want to ask, why do we care? T-shirts, stickers, water bottles, and even aprons. Pick up some of our great stuff at the link in the description below and support the show directly. I get asked about the MSP market size a lot, with SolarWinds MSP spinning off from the corporate parent as Enable. Their filing with the SEC has given some perspectives. Roughly 1,473 MSPs generated at least $50,000 in annual recurring revenue on Enable's software platform in 2020, up 34% from 1,117 in 2019. Those are spending at least $4,100 a month. The company claims more than 25,000 MSPs are customers. The company believes that the market for RMM, security, and data protection will be $43.9 billion by 2025, which is up from $23.3 in 2020. This is from a Frost & Sullivan report they commissioned, and it's a compound annual growth rate of 13.5%. From that filing, the company did incur a decline in new subscription sales and expansion rates due to the blowback from the SolarWinds Orion hack, expecting to incur significant costs and expenses related to the hack. Oh, and of note, the company listed Datto and Kaseya, as well as Auvik, Mimecast, and Veeam as competitors, but not ConnectWise, who is also backed by their private equity firm, Thoma Bravo. And if you're wondering what a CEO of a company like this makes, theirs made $6.7 million in 2020. Now, why do we care? There's constant discussion about how large the market is. I found it notable that the survey focuses on spend and not on the raw numbers of providers. When I measure the market, I'm often asked about the number of providers. Tracking enables net new MSPs, where that were about $4,000 added or so in the past 4 years, tracing back to the creation of SolarWinds MSP. The surge in spending isn't surprising. Besides being obvious, IT spend always goes up, and usually at about this rate. Now, why know ConnectWise as a competitor? The obvious answer is the shared backer. They're clearly a competitor, duh. The blowback is also to be expected. The question that matters is how long it lasts. I predict not too long. The market hasn't been historically harsh on these security incidents. Memory is not that long. This segment will be a legal roundup, as there's some moves to watch. Intel is now being sued for violating wiretap laws over its use of analytics to track keystrokes, mouse movements, and click events on its website. The lawsuit was moved from a federal state court to a federal district court last week. It was brought under the 2020 Florida Security Communications Act, which makes it a crime to intentionally intercept another's electronic communications without consent. The case is not alone. There are at least 24 moving through the courts, mostly in California and Florida. In Michigan, the case of 3 men charged with plotting to kidnap the governor is bringing up another privacy spin. The men used private encrypted chats to communicate. Under Michigan law, a person is guilty of a terrorist threat if they, quote, threaten to commit an act of terrorism and communicates the threat to any other person. The judge in the case dismissed a charge over making terrorist threats because of the encryption, noting that using encrypted communication service was not unlike thinking the thought to yourself. Why do we care? I'd hope it's obvious. Without a set of federal regulations, we're going to have 50 different interpretations of these laws. Encrypted communications as private thoughts? That's a new one, an interesting protection. My point today is less about the specific laws and more about the systemization of tracking them. For a typical IT services company, how much are you dedicating to tracking? Is it a system? My sense is this is now a core competency of IT services companies. Not to get ahead of myself, but wait until you hear about how aware IT pros are on regulation. Apple is expanding its third-party repair program, expanding to 200 more countries. It was launched in 2019 and added Europe and Canada last year. This allows providers to access genuine Apple parts, tools, repair manuals, and diagnostics. Now, why do we care? Look, with the changes in right to repair laws, as well as the sustainability requirements in Europe, this was kind of inevitable. The STAR reports 39 right to repair bills in 25 US states alone. Apple is just getting ahead of it. Still, nice to see them open up, even if it's because they know they have to, more than they necessarily want to. Let's do a cybersecurity roundup. Acronis has released their Cyber Protection Week survey. According to the data, while 80% of organizations are simultaneously running up to 10 different protection and cybersecurity solutions, more than 50% still experienced downtime from data loss last year. Additionally, 43% of IT users don't know if their anti-malware is equipped to tackle zero-day threats. That means they haven't seen those before and don't match any known malware signatures. Why? Their solution doesn't make that information easily accessible. On top of this, 10% of IT professionals have no idea whether their organization is subject to data privacy regulations. In that context, Ubiquiti Networks has disclosed a breach. Their statement says it was an unauthorized access to certain of our information technology systems hosted by a third-party cloud provider, although it declined to name the third party. An independent researcher speaking to Krebs on Security, who was filed with the European Data Protection Authorities, says it was much worse, calling it catastrophic. The company isn't explicitly denying the reports. And as we go broader, U.S. Cyber Command and the Department of Homeland Security should be publishing their analysis of the SolarWinds espionage attacks. It was due to come out this week, but so far it hasn't. Now, why do we care? 10% of pros don't even know if their organization is subject to data privacy regulations? Yeah, that's scary. I said earlier this is a core competency. That needs to be 0. This lack of knowledge about both regulations and technology is just generally scary. Now layer on lack of disclosure requirements, which is clear in Ubiquiti's case, you see where this is going for sure. Sure, it's a big market opportunity, but it's also a giant bullseye target. The Biden administration unveiled this week an 8-year, $2 trillion agenda for the American Jobs Plan, which the White House said will create millions of good jobs, rebuild our country's infrastructure, and position the United States to outcompete China. Quoting liberally from Axios on where the tech money goes. $180 billion for tech R&D, including $50 billion for the National Science Foundation, $40 billion for research labs around the country, $30 billion for job creation in rural areas, $174 billion for the electric vehicle industry, including building a network of 500,000 chargers across the U.S. and ramping up American production of EVs. $100 billion for broadband infrastructure, with the goal of giving 100% of Americans access to high-speed broadband. It would also attempt to make the industry more competitive and cheaper for customers. There's $100 billion earmarked for supply chain work, half of which would go to projects to support production of critical goods in the U.S. Now, why do we care? It's obviously not past, but me and my broadband as utility train is gaining speed. The goals are not immediate, but this is a big deal. I will continue to argue that this is an investment is only good for technology in general and IT services specifically. Google's accelerating its office reopening, with workers returning in a limited capacity in April. And come September, employees will have to formally apply if they want to work remotely for more than 14 days a year. Amazon, meanwhile, said it expects most employees back by early fall. They've been more explicit. Andy Jassy, the incoming CEO, is less keen on remote work, expecting to have an Office-centric culture. You just don't riff the same way, so it's really changed the way that we've had to think about how we drive innovation and how we solicit information from our builders and the types of meetings that we run, he said. Now, why do we care? Don't let it be said I'm not exploring opposing views. I'm certainly biased to remote work. Amazon appears, not so much. In the case of the big tech players, I'm not inclined to think this will make a huge difference on their performance. It's less competitive advantage and more about choice. The smaller the company, the more I think it can be a competitive advantage. It's why I'm so interested in the way the return to the office happens. My bet is that the most companies are going to be some kind of hybrid, even Amazon. Bro culture, gender bias, and micromanagement were top concerns among women in tech who were dissatisfied with their employers, according to a survey from Alpha, again pulling from Axios. Hiring bias is only one cause of tech's gender imbalance. Another problem is that women leave the industry because they find the environment works against their success. A lack of female representation in leadership and an environment with persistent harassment and gender bias were the two top reasons for women who didn't recommend their employer to other women. By contrast, women who were happy at their employer cited as key factors having a female CEO or founder and having male allies, as well as just feeling respected, valued, and listened to. More broadly, more than 1/3 of U.S. employees say the technology involved in daily work frustrates them, according to data published Wednesday by Eagle Hill Consulting. The survey consulted 1,000 U.S. employees across various industries. Of those surveyed, 44% said workplace technology either does nothing to make them feel happy in their job or makes their work harder. 1/3 of employees say their company's technology doesn't help or makes it harder to serve internal or external customers. Now, why do we care? The tech industry has both a challenge and opportunity. I remain convinced that working on these problems are part of the key to a winning strategy. If you can't serve 51% of customers, you should be considering changing the way you work. Fixing tech's gender imbalance is part of that. This show's own research still shows tech leadership by women at less than 20%. Plus, we're not even doing that great with the tech itself. Couple that with Wednesday's data on tech sentiment, and you see the path to be different. Thanks for tuning in to This Week in the Business of Tech. Shows come out each week, pulling together the daily podcast. If you like this show, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The content here is possible because of supporters like you. If you want access to shows early, answers to your questions, and private interactions, join our Patreon. It's pay what you want. You decide what the content is worth. Join at patreon.com/MSPradio. Patreons also get access to the written versions of every story as they come out. If you want the stories right away, you can get them on the daily podcast. Find The Business of Tech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. Subscribe links at businessof.tech, and I'll talk to you again next week.